if I asked you to close your eyes and, conjure up the sound of a garden in late July, there's really only one audio track that fits. It's that low, slightly erratic, heavy vibration.
The buzz.
The buzz, exactly. It's iconic. And usually when we hear that sound, the mental image that follows is, well, it's pretty benign.
Oh, yeah.
We picture the bumblebee. It's the flying panda of the insect world. It's round, it's fuzzy, it bounces off the patio furniture.
Right.
It feels like a friendly, slightly clumsy sidekick to the rest of the garden.
It's interesting you use that word clumsy because that really is the prevailing reputation.
It is, isn't it?
The bumblebee is seen as the lovable oaf of the pollinator world, especially when you compare it to, say, the honeybee, which we view as this hyper-efficient industrial worker.
Right, the organized one.
But if we actually look at the source material, specifically the biological records on the genus Bombus, that clumsy reputation, it just falls apart completely.
It does, because I've definitely watched them, crash into my window more than once.
Well, you're seeing them out of their element. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree,
It looks clumsy, right?
true.
But the mission of this deep dive is to reframe that creature entirely. We aren't looking at a simple garden visitor. We are looking at a creature that dominates environments that would kill a honeybee in minutes.
So we're talking about an extreme survivor.
We're talking about the cold weather special forces of the bee world.
Wow.
These are creatures that defy the intuitive laws of aerodynamics. They possess sensory arrays that let them see invisible forces like electricity, and their internal hive politics make Game of Thrones look like a nursery rhyme.
Okay, Special Forces is a strong rebrand from Flying Panda.
It is.
But I think to understand why they are so impressive, we have to start with the most basic question, the one that always comes up in casual trivia.
The laws of aviation myth.
The idea that they shouldn't exist.
Right.
I remember this distinctly from school. The story goes that an engineer, usually nameless in the retelling,
Always nameless.
looked at a bumblebee, measured its wing surface area, measured its body mass, ran the numbers, and declared flight impossible.
And the punchline is always, but the bee flies anyway because it doesn't know physics.
It's a great story.
It is a fantastic story about the limitations of theoretical science versus biological reality. And unlike a lot of urban legends, this one actually has a paper trail.
Oh,
It's not just an internet meme. It traces back to 1934.
so there was an actual scientist who got this wrong.
There was a French entomologist named Antoine Magnan. He wrote a book called Le Vol des Insectes.
The flight of insects.
Exactly. And in the introduction, he references calculations done by his assistant, an engineer named André Santlagi. And they did, in fact, conclude that the bumblebee should not be able to generate enough lift to get off the ground.
So where did the math break down? Because
A.
obviously the bees are flying. Was it just bad arithmetic?
The arithmetic was fine, but the application was flawed.
Yeah.
They were applying the aerodynamics of fixed-wing aircraft to a flapping insect,
Okay, so they treated it like a tiny airplane wing.
a rigid airfoil moving through the air to generate lift via the Bernoulli principle.
Which works for a Boeing 747, but not a bug.
Precisely. A 747 flies because air moves faster over the curved top of the wing, creating lower pressure. But that requires steady, smooth airflow. A bumblebee's wing is doing something completely different.
It's not rigid.
It's not rigid, it's flexible. And it's not just flapping up and down,
It's rotating, isn't it?
it's a figure-8 motion. And this is where the physics gets really interesting and, where Magnan got lost. When a bumblebee flaps, the leading edge of the wing cuts through the air and creates a massive separation of airflow. On a plane, this would be a disaster.
That's a stall.
It's called a stall. The plane would fall out of the sky.
But the bee uses the stall.
It creates a leading edge vortex, or LEV.
A vortex, okay.
Imagine a horizontal tornado forming right along the top edge of the wing. Because the air in that tornado is spinning so fast, the pressure drops incredibly low. And that low pressure sucks the wing and the bee attached to it upwards.
So they're literally generating mini tornadoes to surf on.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
This is dynamic stall. It's a high-energy, unstable way to fly, but it generates massive amounts of lift. And there's another factor that Magnan missed, which is the scale of the fluid dynamics.
Okay.
We have to talk about Reynolds numbers.
Reynolds numbers. This is a measure of fluid flow, right? Like viscosity versus inertia.
Exactly. For you or me, or a 747, air feels thin. We move through it easily. Inertia dominates.
Sure.
But when you get down to the size of a bumblebee, the air molecules feel relatively closer together. The air feels sticky.
Like swimming in syrup.
maybe not quite syrup, but definitely a light oil. The air resists the movement much more than it does for a bird.
I see.
This viscosity allows the bee to grab the air more effectively than traditional aerodynamic theory predicted. John Maynard Smith, the famous evolutionary biologist, later corrected the record.
And what did he find?
He showed that because of this viscosity, the small wings can move massive volumes of air relative to the bee's size.
So the engineering works, but only if you use the physics of the microscale, not the macro scale.
Correct. But flying this way, churning up vortices in sticky air is expensive. It burns a tremendous amount of fuel.
Which brings us to the engine. If they are burning that much energy, they must be generating a lot of heat.
And this is the key to their identity as special forces. Bumblebees are essentially warm-blooded engines inside a cold-blooded shell.
Wait, unpack that. I thought insects were poikilotherms cold-blooded. Their body temp equals the outside air temp?
Generally, yes. If you put a housefly in a refrigerator, it slows down and stops.
Right.
But bumblebees exhibit facultative endothermy or heterothermy. They can generate their own heat.
They make their own heat.
To fly, their thoracic muscles, the massive flight muscles in the chest, must be at least 30 degrees Celsius. That is 86 degrees Fahrenheit.
So even if it's 40 degrees outside, their chest needs to be 86 degrees.
Exactly. We see Bombus bimaculatus flying when the air temperature is just a few degrees above freezing. No honeybee can do that.
No way.
A honeybee would literally fall out of the air in a chill coma.
How do they bridge that gap? If they wake up in a cold nest, how do they start the engine?
They shiver. But it's a specific kind of shivering. They have a biological clutch mechanism.
A clutch?
They can unhook the wing muscles from the wings themselves.
Oh, like putting a car in neutral and revving the engine?
That is a perfect analogy. They rev the engine, vibrating those massive muscles without flapping the wings. This metabolic burn creates waste heat.
Ah, okay.
It takes about 5 minutes of this revving to raise their thoracic temperature from ambient to flight ready.
That explains why you sometimes see them on the ground just vibrating before they take off. They aren't stuck, they're warming up.
They are pre-flighting the aircraft. But here's the problem. Once they take off into freezing air, the wind chill should strip that heat away instantly.
They're tiny.
They're tiny, and they have a lot of surface area.
So they need insulation. The fuzz.
The pile. That fuzzy coat isn't just for aesthetics. It traps a boundary layer of air against the body to keep the heat in. But they also have an internal radiator system.
A radiator.
A countercurrent heat exchanger.
I've heard of this in penguins, specifically in their feet. Warm blood going down heats the cold blood coming up.
Exactly the same principle. The bumblebee's heart pumps blood hemolymph from the abdomen to the thorax.
The back to the front.
Right. The thorax is the hot engine. The abdomen is usually colder. If the hot blood from the thorax flowed straight to the abdomen, the heat would just be lost to the outside air.
So the heat exchanger captures it.
The vessel carrying cool blood forward to the chest runs right alongside the vessel carrying hot blood back to the abdomen. The heat jumps across.
Wow.
The cool blood gets preheated before it hits the muscles, and the hot blood gets cooled down before it goes to the abdomen. It keeps the heat trapped in the chest where it's needed.
That is incredibly sophisticated engineering for an insect. It essentially creates a thermal loop in the center of the body.
It allows them to conquer the globe. This is why we find bumblebees in the Arctic Circle. We find them on Ellesmere Island. We find them in the Himalayas.
There was a study in the notes about Mount Everest that I found fascinating.
Yes, the simulated altitude study. Researchers took bumblebees and put them in a flight chamber, then pumped the air out to simulate the barometric pressure at the summit of Mount Everest.
The death zone.
The air is incredibly thin up there. There are fewer molecules to push against to create that lift we talked about.
So they shouldn't be able to fly.
The researchers expected the bees to fail. Instead, the bees just changed gears.
How?
They increased the amplitude of the wing stroke. They swung the wings wider.
Not faster.
They didn't beat faster, which is energetically costly. They just reached further with every stroke to grab more of that thin air. They flew successfully at pressures equivalent to 9,000 meters.
That is higher than Everest.
It is.
So we have a heat-generating, vortex-surfing, high-altitude climber. But all of this physical prowess is useless if they can't find food. And this brings us to their intelligence, which I think is even more surprising than their flight.
It is. We tend to think of insects as biological robots, input stimulus, output reaction.
Right, like little machines.
But bumblebees show a flexibility of behavior that suggests something much closer to cognition.
So let's talk about how they find flowers. We know they like color. We know they like scent. But the research mentions a sixth sense.
Electroreception.
Yeah.
Bumblebees are one of the few animals known to detect electric fields in the air.
How does a flower have an electric field?
It's basic atmospheric physics.
Mm-hmm.
The ground has a negative charge. The air generally has a positive charge.
Oh.
Plants grow out of the ground, so they conduct that negative charge up their stems. They act like little lightning rods, concentrating the electric field at the petals.
So a flower is a negative terminal.
Right. Now the bee is flying through the air. As it flies, the friction of the air and dust against its body strips electrons or deposits them. The bee builds up a strong positive charge.
Static electricity, like rubbing a balloon on your hair.
Exactly. So you have a positively charged bee approaching a negatively charged flower. When the bee lands, that difference in charge sparks.
A spark.
Not a visible spark, but a flow of charge.
Yeah.
The bee effectively cancels out some of the flower's negative charge.
It grounds the flower.
Temporarily, yes. It changes the geometry of the flower's electric field. It takes minutes for the plant to pump that charge back up and restore the field.
And the bees can see this.
They can feel it. The mechanics are fascinating. The bee has tiny mechanosensory hairs on its body. When it enters an electric field, the physical force of the electricity pulls on those hairs. It's like the hair on your arm standing up during a storm.
So a bee flies up to a patch of flowers. It sees a purple flower, but it also feels the static coming off it.
And if the static pull is strong, the bee knows. This flower has a strong field. It hasn't been grounded recently. It's full of nectar.
But if the field is weak...
Another bee was just here. The battery is drained. The nectar is probably gone. Don't waste energy landing.
That is phenomenally efficient. It's an invisible occupied sign.
And it prevents them from wasting that precious heat and sugar on empty flowers. But they back this up with chemistry, too.
The smelly feet phenomenon.
I love that term.
Me too.
It's literally what it is. Bumblebee feet secrete a complex mix of hydrocarbons. When they walk on a petal, they leave oily footprints.
A scent trail.
Exactly. Other bees can smell those footprints. If the scent is fresh and volatile, they avoid the flower. If the scent is oxidized or evaporated, they know it's been long enough for the flower to refill.
So they are cross-referencing electric data with chemical data to make foraging decisions.
They are. And they are learning. This is the biggest leap in our understanding social learning. For a long time, we thought only vertebrates, mammals, birds could learn by watching others. We thought insects just knew what to do by instinct.
But the string-pulling experiment changed that.
This was a landmark study with Bombus terrestris. Researchers set up a puzzle. They put a blue plastic disc with sugar water in the center of a table.
Okay.
But they put the disc under a sheet of glass. The bee could see the sugar, smell the sugar, but couldn't reach it.
Frustrating.
Very. But attached to the disc was a string that stuck out from under the glass. The only solution was to grab the string, walk backward, and pull the disc out.
Did they figure it out on their own?
A few genius bees figured it out by trial and error over a long period. But here's the kicker.
How do they do?
They took those genius bees and let them perform the trick while naive bees watched from behind a screen.
The students watching the master.
Then they released the students. And the bees that had watched the demonstration solved the puzzle almost immediately.
No way.
They didn't do trial and error. They went straight for the string.
They copied the behavior.
They did. And then those bees taught a second generation. The behavior spread through the colony.
That is the definition of culture, the transmission of information that isn't genetic.
It is.
It really challenges the way we treat them. If you squash a bee, you aren't just squashing a bug, you're squashing a problem solver that might be the Einstein of its hive.
It raises some uncomfortable ethical questions, certainly, especially given how we use them in agriculture. We rely on their intelligence for specific crops, like tomatoes.
Right. I read about buzz pollination. Why is the bumblebee better at this than the honeybee?
It comes down to the architecture of the flower. A tomato flower, and things like blueberries, cranberries, eggplants, it keeps its pollen locked up tight inside a tube called the anther.
Okay.
The pollen is sticky. It doesn't just fall out.
So honeybee lands on it.
And gets nothing. Honeybees are polite foragers. They brush against the pollen. That works for apples or almonds. It fails for tomatoes. The bumblebee, however, is a brute force engineer.
What's the technique?
It grabs the flower with its mandibles, bites down hard to anchor itself. Then it curls its abdomen underneath and decouples its flight muscles, just like when it's warming up.
Ah, revving the engine again.
It revs the engine to a specific frequency.
It turns itself into a tuning fork.
Exactly. It vibrates the flower at a specific resonance, usually a middle C. The vibration is so intense that the pollen inside the anther explodes.
Explodes.
It is literally shaken loose by the sonic energy and blasts out of the pore, covering the bee's fuzzy body.
Sonication.
Yes. Without that violent vibration, you don't get good tomatoes. If you buy a greenhouse tomato, it exists because a bumblebee bit a flower and screamed at it with its muscles.
We've painted a picture of a creature that is high-tech, intelligent, and efficient. But now we have to look at where they live. Because if the bumblebee is a sleek fighter jet, its hangar is, well, it's a dump.
It's a bit of a shantytown, yes.
Yeah.
This is a major difference from honeybees.
Big time.
Honeybees are master architects. They build hexagonal wax combs that are mathematically perfect. They build vertical sheets. They house 50,000 individuals.
And the bumblebee nest?
It's usually underground. They don't dig their own holes. They find abandoned real estate.
Squatters.
Old mouse burrows are the favorite. Or under a shed. Or in a compost heap.
Squatters' rights.
Basically. And inside, it's chaotic.
Oh.
They build wax pots to hold nectar and pollen, but they're just lumped together. It looks like a pile of grapes made of dirty wax.
And the wax itself, the production method is weird too, right?
Honeybees secrete wax from scales on their abdomen and chew it. Bumblebees secrete it from glands between their abdominal segments, but it comes out looking like greasy flakes.
The source text called it dandruff.
It does look like dandruff. The bee scrapes this wax dandruff off its belly and molds it into these messy pots. It's functional, but it's not pretty.
And the colony structure is smaller too.
Much smaller.
How many bees?
Usually between 50 and 400. A massive nest might have 1,700, but that's rare. And crucially, the colony is annual. It doesn't survive the winter.
The whole colony dies.
Every autumn, the old queen, the workers, and the males die. The only survivors are the new young queens.
The new queens.
They mate, then go find a hole in the ground to hibernate.
So every spring, the bumblebee population reboots from zero.
Yes. The queen wakes up in spring, starving, and has to do everything herself. She finds a mouse hole, builds the first wax pot, lays the first eggs, keeps them warm, and forages for pollen.
A single mother working 3 jobs.
Until her first daughters hatch to take over the labor. Yes.
That makes the colony feel much more vulnerable than a honeybee hive. If that one queen gets hit by a car in April, the whole potential colony is gone.
Exactly. The bottleneck is extreme. And because the nest is small and often unguarded compared to a honeybee hive, it is vulnerable to invasion.
Ah.
This brings us to the villains of our story.
The cuckoo bumblebees. Cythyrus.
This is a subgenus of bumblebees that has evolved to be the ultimate freeloader. They are brood parasites.
Like the bird?
Just like the cuckoo bird. Over millions of years, these bees have lost the ability to be bees. They have lost the pollen baskets on their legs.
So they can't even collect pollen.
Even if they wanted to collect food for their young, they physically can't carry it.
So they have to steal it.
They have to steal a workforce. The life cycle of a cuckoo bee is like a horror movie script.
Oh boy.
A female cuckoo wakes up later in the spring than the regular bumblebees. She waits until the regular colonies have established a workforce.
She lets them do the heavy lifting of building the nursery.
Right. Then she locates a nest, say, a Bombus terrestris nest. She enters.
Does she sneak in? Or is it a raid?
It varies, but often it is a violent takeover. Cuckoo bees are built for combat. Their exoskeleton is significantly thicker and harder than a normal bee's.
They're armored.
They're armored tanks. Their stingers are larger. Their mandibles are more jagged. She enters the nest and confronts the resident queen. It's a gladiator match.
Oh, wow.
The cuckoo bee will often maul the resident queen to death. Or, in some species, she just bullies the queen into submission, pushing her to the corner of the nest.
And the workers, the daughters of the original queen, why don't they swarm her?
They try, but the cuckoo bee has armor, so their stings often can't penetrate. And she has chemical weapons.
Of course she does.
She releases pheromones that mimic the queen's scent, but also suppress the workers' aggression. She effectively brainwashes the colony.
Look at me, I am the captain now.
Precisely. The workers, confused and chemically subdued, start feeding the cuckoo bee's larvae instead of their own sisters.
So her young take over.
The cuckoo larvae eat the food, grow up, and hatch. But they only hatch into males and new cuckoo queens.
No workers.
No workers. So the colony is doomed. The original workforce dies of old age. Because no new workers are being born, the nest collapses. But by then, the new generation of cuckoo queens has flown away to repeat the cycle next year.
It's parasitic genius, but it's brutal.
It's an evolutionary arms race. The host bees are evolving to recognize the invaders, and the invaders are evolving better disguises.
So the bumblebee has to survive the freezing cold, the complex physics of flight, and armored home invaders. But now they're facing a threat that they can't evolve fast enough to beat.
Us.
Us.
The decline. This is the part of the deep dive where the tone has to shift.
Yeah.
Because the data is alarming. Bumblebee ranges are shrinking across the northern hemisphere.
What is the main driver? Is it just habitat loss, generally?
It's more specific than that. It's the industrialization of the landscape. I want to draw a connection that people rarely make.
Okay.
The connection between the invention of the internal combustion engine and the starvation of the bumblebee.
Connect those dots.
Go back to 1910. Agriculture runs on horses. Millions of horses. What do horses eat?
Grass.
And clover, red clover. It's a high-protein nitrogen fixer. Farmers grew massive rotations of red clover to feed the horses that pulled the plows.
And bumblebees like clover.
Red clover is a deep flower. Honeybees can't really work it. Their tongues are too short. But long-tongued bumblebees love it. It was their primary fuel station.
Then the tractor arrives.
We invent the tractor. The tractor eats diesel, not clover. Within a few decades, red clover creates no value for the farmer. They switch to chemical fertilizers to grow pure grass for silage. The clover fields vanish.
So the bumblebees lost their grocery stores because we fired the horses.
In the UK alone, 97% of flower-rich grasslands were lost in the 20th century. That is a caloric catastrophe for a high-energy insect.
And then on top of the starvation, we poisoned the food that was left.
Neonicotinoids.
Right.
This is the second hammer blow. Neonicotinoids are a class of pesticide chemically related to nicotine. They are neurotoxins.
How do they work?
They bind to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in the insect's central nervous system. They overstimulate the nerves. In high doses, the insect goes into convulsions and dies. That's acute toxicity.
But farmers argue they don't use high doses. They use safe levels.
And this is where the nuance matters, the sublethal effects. The pesticide is systemic. You coat the seed, the plant grows, and the poison is inside the nectar and pollen.
So the bee drinks it.
It drinks it. It doesn't die. But it gets drunk.
Drunk.
Impaired. We talked about their intelligence earlier. The string pulling, the navigation, the learning. Neonicotinoids degrade those cognitive functions.
So a poison bee.
A poisoned bumblebee forgets the color of the flowers it needs. It forgets how to navigate home.
It gets lost.
It gets lost. Or it becomes inefficient. A study on Bombus terrestris showed that exposure to field-realistic levels of imidacloprid, a common neonico, reduced the production of new queens by 85%.
85%.
Imagine a human city where the birth rate drops by 85% in one generation. That is a collapse.
And it's worse for them.
Remember, unlike honeybees, bumblebees don't have thousands of backup workers. If a bumblebee queen is impaired, or if her small workforce gets lost and doesn't come back with food, the colony starves.
And we are seeing this happen in real time. Species like the rusty-patched bumblebee are disappearing.
The rusty-patched used to be everywhere in the U.S. Midwest. Now it's critically endangered. Franklin's bumblebee might already be extinct. We haven't seen one in years.
It's tragic because, culturally, we love them. We don't fear them like wasps. They are characters in our stories.
They are. The name Dumbledore, for instance.
J.K. Rowling?
She dug up an old English dialect word. Dumbledore means bumblebee. She pictured the character wandering the halls of Hogwarts, humming to himself.
It fits perfectly.
And Emily Dickinson wrote extensively about them. She contrasted the vanity of the bumblebee with the practicality of the honeybee. She saw the bumblebee as a creature of leisure, dressed in gold and purple.
Which is ironic now that we know they work harder, longer, and in colder conditions than the honeybee.
We projected our own feelings onto them. We saw slow and fuzzy and thought lazy. The reality is efficient and insulated. As we wrap this up, I want to touch on one final irony in the notes. We are actually breeding bumblebees now, right, for the tomato industry.
We are. It's a massive global trade. Factories produce millions of bumblebee nests in boxes and ship them to greenhouses all over the world.
But this solution is becoming a problem.
It's called pathogen spillover. These factory-farmed bees are genetically uniform and kept in high densities. Disease spreads easily. Cryphidia, nosema, these are gut parasites.
And the bees escape the greenhouses.
They fly out the vents. They visit wildflowers near the greenhouse. They defecate on the flowers.
Oh, no.
Then a wild bumblebee, maybe a rare species, lands on that flower and picks up the industrial disease.
So we are exporting pandemics to the wild populations.
We are infecting the special forces with diseases brewed in the barracks. It's a major driver of decline in South America and Japan, where imported European bumblebees are wiping out native species.
It feels like we are dismantling a system we barely understand. That is the core message here. The bumblebee is a keystone. It supports the wildflowers that hold the soil together. It pollinates the crops that feed us. It operates in the rain and the cold when other pollinators hide.
So what is the actionable advice here? Aside from ban all pesticides, which is a slow political process, what does the average person do?
It's surprisingly simple. Embrace the mess.
The mess.
Bumblebees need messy homes. They need old mouse holes, piles of dry grass, upturned pots. A perfectly manicured lawn is a desert to them.
So leave a corner of your garden wild.
Exactly. And plant the fuel. Clover, lavender, foxglove. Plants with deep, complex flowers. Restore the fuel stations that the tractors took away.
So less lawnmower, more clover.
It's the easiest conservation work you'll ever do. Just do less work.
I think I can handle that. So to recap, they surf on air vortices, they heat their chests like engines, they see electric fields, they fight armored invaders, and they just need us to be a little bit messier in the garden.
That is the bumblebee in a nutshell.
Next time you hear that buzz, remember, it's not just a bug. It's a tiny, fuzzy, heat-seeking missile of biological engineering.
And we'd be lost without them.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Stay curious. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today, we're not just, dusting off a history book. We are opening a cold case file on the singular moment where the whole human experiment almost ended.
Yeah, and it sounds so hyperbolic when you say it like that, doesn't it? The human experiment almost ended. But when you actually look at the data, it's really not. It's a statistical probability we just narrowly miss.
It's genuinely terrifying. We're talking, of course, about October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis, those 13 days where the United States and the Soviet Union were just staring each other down over nuclear missiles in Cuba. But our mission today is to go way beyond the high school history version. You know the one I mean. JFK looks tough, Khrushchev blinks, the U.S. wins, everyone goes home.
Right. The whole eyeball-to-eyeball myth. It's a comforting story, I guess. It suggests that these rational, calm men were totally in control. But the documents we have here, the declassified transcripts, the Soviet military archives, all the intelligence assessments after the fact, they tell a much, much messier story.
Messier is a good word for it.
It wasn't a chess match. It was more like a chaotic scramble in a pitch-black room full of furniture you keep bumping into.
And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We're going to look at the bizarre intelligence failures and the successes, the shadow war that was happening while the diplomats were talking, and specifically the mechanics of how close we actually truly came.
And we really have to focus on the motivations. Because if you don't understand why the pieces were on the board in the first place, none of the moves make any sense at all.
Exactly. So to really get the stakes, we have to look at the board before the game even started. October 62 didn't just happen in a vacuum. You have to go back.
You absolutely do. You can't understand why Nikita Khrushchev would take such a monumental gamble. Shipping nuclear weapons halfway across the world right into America's backyard without understanding the strategic imbalance.
And this is where we hit the first big irony, right? It's 1960. John F. Kennedy is running for president. And a huge part of his platform, his big hammer against the Republicans, is the so-called missile gap.
The famous missile gap? Kennedy was all over this.
Yeah.
He claimed the Eisenhower administration had just let the Soviets pull way ahead in nuclear technology. He painted this picture of a Soviet Union just mass-producing missiles ready to overwhelm the U.S.
And it worked. It was a terrifying image for the American public.
It was. But then he wins. He gets into the Oval Office, he gets the classified briefings, the real numbers, and what does he find?
The gap is real.
The gap is absolutely real, but it's in the complete opposite direction.
It's a chasm.
A chasm, and the United States was standing on the high ground. The U.S. was, without question, the overwhelmingly dominant nuclear power.
Let's put some hard numbers on that, because the disparity it's actually shocking when you see it laid out.
It is staggering. In 1961, the Soviet Union had effectively four reliable intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that could launch from Russia and hit the continental United States.
Four. Wait, I have to stop you there. Just 4 missiles.
4. These were the R-7 Semyorkas. And honestly, reliable is a pretty generous term. These were these massive, clunky rockets that use liquid fuel. They took hours to fuel up. You couldn't keep them on alert.
And they were just sitting out in the open.
Just sitting on open launch pads that U.S. bombers could have easily targeted and destroyed.
So in any kind of first strike, the U.S. could basically wipe out their entire long-range arsenal before they even got off the ground.
Pretty much. By October 1962, estimates range a bit. Maybe they'd scrape together up to 75, but they were still wildly unreliable and inaccurate.
Okay, so that's the Soviet side. What about the American side?
The United States had 170 operational ICBMs.
170.
But that's just the long-range stuff. If you factor in the entire nuclear stockpile, the bombers, the submarines, the tactical weapons, the U.S. had roughly 27,000 nuclear warheads.
27,000? And the Soviets?
About 3,600.
So 27,000 versus 3,600. I mean, that is not a fair fight.
It wasn't a fight. It was a potential massacre. And Khrushchev knew it. He was blustering on the world stage, banging his shoe at the UN, claiming they were churning out missiles like sausages. But he knew it was all a bluff. He knew if the balloon ever went up, the Soviet Union would be erased. The U.S. might suffer damage, sure, but the Soviet Union would just cease to exist.
And that psychology is so important. It creates this desperation for the Soviets. They're cornered. They're the underdog barking as loud as it can to hide the fact that it has no teeth.
Right, and then just to make it worse, the U.S. tightens the cruise even further with the Jupiter missiles.
The Jupiters. This is such a critical piece of the puzzle that often gets glossed over in the American version of the story.
It really does. The U.S. had deployed these medium-range ballistic missiles, MRBMs, in Italy and, much more importantly, in Turkey.
And Turkey's right on the Soviet border.
Exactly. I mean, try to imagine the view from the Kremlin. You look south, and there are American nuclear missiles that are capable of hitting Moscow in about 10 to 15 minutes.
Almost no warning time.
None. Khrushchev famously asked his advisors, what would it feel like to have a neighbor looking over your fence with a shotgun? That's how she saw the Jupiters.
So from the Soviet perspective, they're surrounded, they're outgunned. And then we have the third major player in this whole drama, Fidel Castro in Cuba.
Right. We have to look at Havana. The Cuban Revolution happens in '59. Castro takes over, and almost immediately the U.S. is hostile. They just cannot abide a communist foothold 90 miles off the coast of Florida.
And this isn't just diplomatic coldness we're talking about. This brings us to the Bay of Pigs.
April 1961, a total unmitigated disaster for the Kennedy administration. The CIA trains this brigade of Cuban exiles to invade the island, hoping they'll spark a counter-revolution. It just fails spectacularly.
Kennedy gets cold feet, refuses to provide air cover.
And the exiles are captured or killed. It hands Castro this massive propaganda victory.
But the U.S. didn't stop there, did they? I mean, reading through these files on Operation Mongoose, honestly, it reads like a thriller written by someone on hallucinogens.
It really does. After the Bay of Pigs failed, the Kennedy brothers, JFK and RFK, they authorized this massive covert campaign to destabilize Cuba. Operation Mongoose wasn't just espionage, it was state-sponsored terrorism.
We're talking sabotage.
Oh, yeah. Sabotage of power plants, burning sugarcane fields, contaminating sugar exports. And then you have those famously wild CIA plots to assassinate Castro with, exploding cigars or poisoned wetsuits.
Right.
But the day-to-day reality for Cubans was economic strangulation and constant low-level attacks.
So if you're Fidel Castro, you're sitting in Havana, you've survived one invasion, your fields are burning, and you've got the superpower to the north openly discussing your removal from power. You don't just think an invasion is coming, you know it is.
Precisely. Castro and Khrushchev were both operating under the very reasonable assumption that a second full-scale U.S. invasion of Cuba was inevitable. And frankly, they were probably right. The Pentagon had already drawn up detailed plans for it.
So, May 1962, all these interests converge. Khrushchev needs a way to balance the nuclear scales without building a bunch of expensive ICBMs. Castro needs a security guarantee to stop the Americans from invading.
And the solution creates the crisis. Put Soviet missiles in Cuba.
It's a brutally efficient solution when you think about it. If you can't reach the U.S. from Russia, you just move your launch pad to the Caribbean. And suddenly all those medium-range missiles can hit Washington, D.C., New York, Chicago.
It completely bypasses the U.S. early warning systems, which were all pointed north over the Arctic looking for missiles coming from Russia. It instantly levels the strategic playing field.
Okay, but here's the logistical nightmare. How do you move an entire army, nuclear weapons, and 43,000 troops halfway around the world right under the nose of the greatest naval power in history without anyone noticing?
This brings us to the Soviet doctrine of Maskirovka.
Maskirovka. Deception.
Denial and deception on a grand scale. The operation was codenamed Anadyr. Now, Anadyr is a river in the far frozen east of Siberia. That name itself was the first layer of the lie.
So they were faking a deployment to the Arctic.
Yes, and the thoroughness here is just incredible. They outfitted the troops with fleece-lined parkas, felt boots, all kinds of ski equipment. They briefed the officers on cold weather combat tactics.
Wait, just imagine being a Soviet soldier. You're holding a pair of skis, you get on a ship, you spend weeks in the hold, not knowing where you're going, and then you walk out into the humid tropical heat of Cuba.
It was total compartmentalization. Even the ship captains didn't know where they were going until they opened sealed orders out at sea. And the missile technicians, the guys who actually knew how to operate the nuclear warheads.
Let me guess, they weren't wearing badges that said nuclear technician.
Far from it. They were listed on the manifests as machine operators, irrigation specialists, and agricultural experts.
So you've got thousands of farmers showing up in Havana who have never held a hoe in their lives. But they can calculate a ballistic trajectory.
Exactly. And for months, it actually worked. The U.S. saw the ships, they saw the buildup of conventional arms tanks, SAM sites, but they missed the offensive missiles.
Which leads us to the great intelligence failure, and then eventually the success of the discovery. Because there was a period right when it mattered most where the U.S. just stopped looking.
The photo gap. For about 5 weeks, from early September to mid-October, U-2 spy plane flights over the western part of Cuba were significantly restricted.
Why? I mean, we knew the Soviets are up to something. Why would we blind ourselves at that exact moment?
Politics and fear. In early September, a Taiwanese U-2 had been shot down over China. The Kennedy administration was terrified that if a U.S. U-2 was shot down over Cuba, it would cause this huge international incident right before the midterm elections. They didn't want to rock the boat.
So they prioritized political optics over intelligence gathering. That feels like a recurring theme in history.
It is a classic cautionary tale. They didn't want to provoke a crisis, so they created the conditions for a much, much worse one. But while the skies were empty, the ground was talking.
This is the part of the story that just fascinates me. The human intelligence. The spies on the ground.
Agents and local Cubans were reporting these massive convoys moving at night, but they noticed a very peculiar detail about the trucks.
What was it?
The trucks were hauling these long canvas-covered objects, but when the convoys went through small Cuban towns, they couldn't turn the corners.
They couldn't make a standard turn.
No. The trailers were so long that to make a right-angle turn in a village square, they had to stop, back up, realign, and then go. This whole awkward shuffle.
And why is that a smoking gun?
Because the analysts at the CIA knew the specs of Soviet equipment. Defensive missiles like anti-aircraft systems were on shorter trailers. They could make a corner just fine. The only thing in the entire Soviet arsenal that required a trailer that long and unwieldy was the R-12 medium-range ballistic missile.
It's amazing. The geometry of a street corner gave them away.
It raised the alarm. It was enough to override the political fears. So on October 14, 1962, the restrictions are lifted. Major Richard Heiser flies a U-2 over western Cuba.
And the technology on these U-2s, we should probably clarify. We're not talking about blurry photos from 70,000 feet.
No. These were marvels of engineering. Flying at that stratospheric height, the cameras could resolve objects on the ground as small as 2.5 feet. They could read the markings on a runway.
So Heiser comes back, the film is developed, and the analysts at the NPIC, the National Photographic Interpretation Center, get to work.
And this is where another piece of luck comes in, or rather, espionage. The analysts were looking for a very specific pattern. They found the signature slash marks of the missile sites at a place called San Cristobal, but they only knew what to look for because of a man named Colonel Oleg Penkovsky.
The Soviet double agent.
Yes. Penkovsky was a colonel in Soviet military intelligence who was secretly working for the CIA and MI6. He had provided the West with the actual technical manuals for the SS-4 and SS-5 missile systems. Without those manuals, the analysts might have looked at the tents and the cables and just seen generic construction. But because of Penkovsky, they could map the site perfectly. Here's the oxidizer truck, here's the fuel truck, here's the erector launcher.
It's terrifying to think how easily that could have been missed without that one man's betrayal of his country. So October 16th, the photos hit the president's desk. Mr. President, there are nuclear missiles in Cuba.
And the clock starts. This is the official beginning of the 13 days. Kennedy immediately convenes ex-GandM, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council.
Talk about the atmosphere in that room. You had the actual tape recordings, which is just so unique for this era.
It was tense, it was smoky, and it was exhausted. You have all the heavy hitters, Robert McNamara at Defense, Dean Rusk at State, RFK as Attorney General, and of course the military leadership, the Joint Chiefs.
The options on the table were just grim. I think one of the sources called it the spectrum of pain.
Right. Option 1, do nothing.
Which Kennedy actually considered for a minute, didn't he?
He did. He made the point that militarily, a missile from Cuba isn't that different from an ICBM from Russia. Dead is dead. But politically, it was suicide. It would shatter the confidence of NATO. If the U.S. wouldn't protect its own hemisphere, who would believe they'd protect West Berlin?
So do nothing is off the table. What about the diplomatic route?
Diplomacy was considered just too slow. While they talked, the missiles would become operational. The clock was ticking too fast.
So that leaves the military options. And this is where the friction in that room was just white hot.
The Joint Chiefs, led by General Curtis LeMay, the man who firebombed Tokyo in World War II, they wanted blood. They wanted a massive airstrike to destroy the missiles, followed immediately by a full-scale invasion of Cuba.
Boots on the ground, regime change, the works.
LeMay was incredibly aggressive. You can hear it on the tapes. He thought Kennedy was being weak. He argued that the Soviets would not respond to an invasion. He essentially said, let's take them out now while we have the advantage.
Which, looking back, is just horrifying. Because Kennedy was deeply skeptical of the military, wasn't he?
Deeply skeptical. He looked at the board and he saw the linkage. He kept asking, if we invade Cuba, what does Khrushchev do? He was convinced Khrushchev would seize West Berlin in retaliation. And if Soviet tanks roll into West Berlin, NATO has to fight back. And then you have World War III.
So he needs a middle path, something between total surrender and starting World War III.
And McNamara and the others, they eventually settle on the blockade.
But they don't call it a blockade. They're very careful to call it a quarantine. Is this just semantic word games?
No, it's crucial legal maneuvering. Under international law, a blockade is an act of war. It stops all commerce, food, medicine, oil. If you declare a blockade, you are technically at war with the Soviet Union.
Not a great way to start a de-escalation.
Exactly. A quarantine, on the other hand, was a new concept they basically invented on the fly. It was selective. They weren't blocking food or fuel. They were only blocking offensive military equipment. And they got the Organization of American States, the OAS, to vote on it, which gave it this veneer of regional legality.
So October 22nd. Kennedy goes on national television. He tells the American people and the Kremlin what's happening.
The speech is chilling. He draws a line in the sand. He states that any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere will be regarded as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response.
That is diplomatic code for, if one missile leaves Cuba, we will burn the Soviet Union to the ground.
Yes. It was the unambiguous threat of massive nuclear retaliation.
Yeah.
And the U.S. military immediately moves to DEFCON 3 worldwide. But the Strategic Air Command SA, the nuclear bombers, they moved to DEFCON 2.
Let's explain DEFCON 2. We hear these terms in movies, but what does it actually mean on the ground?
DEFCON 5 is normal peacetime. DEFCON 1 is war is imminent or has already started. DEFCON 2 is fast pace. It means the troops are in the trenches, the safeties are off.
And SSC was doing something completely unprecedented at this alert level.
They initiated what were called Chrome Dome alerts. At any given moment, 1/8 of the entire B-52 bomber fleet was in the air. We're talking about dozens of bombers loaded with megaton-class nuclear weapons just circling outside Soviet airspace waiting for the go code.
So if you're a Soviet radar operator, you're looking at your screen and you see this massive, constant swarm of nuclear bombers hovering right on your border 24/7. The pressure must have been unbelievable.
It was designed to be. It was a message. We are ready to drop the hammer at a moment's notice.
Meanwhile, the quarantine goes into effect. The U.S. Navy surrounds Cuba, but the missiles are already there.
That was the problem. The quarantine stopped new missiles from arriving, but the CIA estimated there were already plenty on the island, and the Soviet construction crews were working day and night to make them operational.
This brings us to the Shadow War. Because while XCOM is debating in Washington and the Navy is sailing, there is a reality on the ground in Cuba that the White House did not understand at all.
And this is, I think, the most frightening part of all the new historical evidence. The unknown unknowns.
What did we miss?
We missed the tactical nuclear weapons.
Okay, define the difference for us. Strategic versus tactical.
Strategic weapons are the big ones. The city killers. The missiles aimed at D.C. or New York, we knew about those. Tactical weapons are battlefield nukes, much shorter range. They're designed to wipe out an aircraft carrier group or an invading army division.
And the Soviets had these in Cuba.
They had about 100 of them. Nuclear warheads for FKR cruise missiles, nuclear artillery shells, and nuclear bombs for their L-28 bombers.
Okay, so let's play out the Joint Chiefs plan again. LeMay wants to invade. He thinks he's fighting a conventional Cuban army.
If the U.S. Marines had landed on the beaches of Cuba at Tara or anywhere else, they would not have been met with just machine gun fire. They likely would have been met with tactical nuclear cruise missiles.
The invasion fleet would have been vaporized.
Instantly. Thousands of American troops dead in seconds. And here's the kicker. The local Soviet commanders in Cuba initially had the authority to use them.
They didn't need to call Moscow?
Not for the tactical weapons. Not at first. Moscow had pre-delegated the authority to the commander, General Pliev, in case communications were cut. If he saw an invasion fleet, he had the green light to fire.
If that happens,
yeah,
the U.S. has to respond.
The U.S. would have nuked Cuba. Then they likely would have struck the Soviet Union. It would have been the apocalypse. And Kennedy didn't know these weapons were there. He was making life-or-death decisions based on completely incomplete data.
That brings us to October 27th, Black Saturday. The day the dam just almost broke.
If there is a single day where the world almost ended, it was October 27, 1962. Everything that could go wrong went wrong at once.
Start with the U-2.
Major Rudolf Anderson. He's flying a photo reconnaissance run over Cuba. A Soviet SAM crew on the ground tracks him. Now, Khrushchev had given strict, explicit orders, do not shoot. He did not want to start the war by accident.
And why did they fire?
The local commanders, two generals named Grechiko and Garbuz, were watching the radar. They saw the U-2. They felt like they were being targeted. They couldn't reach General Pliev at headquarters, so they made the call themselves. Fire.
A rogue command.
Effectively, yes. An SA-2 missile blows the U-2 out in the sky. Major Anderson is killed.
Now, the U.S. had a standing agreement in XCOM. If U-2 is shot down, we attack the SAM site, we retaliate.
And the military was ready to go. They were spooling up the jets. But Kennedy, he pulled back.
He blinked.
He hesitated. He told his brother, it might have been an accident. It might have been one guy on the ground getting itchy fingers. He decided to wait one more day before ordering the strike.
And that hesitation saved us.
Yeah.
Because it was just an itchy finger.
Exactly. But while this air war is heating up, the situation at sea is getting even worse. We have to talk about the submarine B-59.
This is the story that keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
Set the scene for us.
So the U.S. Navy is dropping depth charges on Soviet submarines to try and force them to surface. They're using these signaling charges. They're basically hand grenades. They're loud, they're annoying, but they're not powerful enough to crush a hull.
But the Soviets on the sub don't know that.
They have no idea. The captain of B-59, Valentin Savitsky, has been underwater for days. The sub's batteries are dying. The air conditioning has failed. The temperature inside the submarine is over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The sailors are fainting from heat stroke and carbon dioxide poisoning.
It's a literal pressure cooker.
And suddenly, explosions are rocking the hull. Bam, 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 the lights are flickering. Savitsky tries to contact Moscow, but he has no signal. He is completely cut off from the world.
So what's his conclusion?
He concludes the war has already started. He thinks the Americans are bombing him to sink him, and he snaps.
And this submarine isn't just carrying regular torpedoes. It has a special weapon.
It had a single nuclear torpedo, 15 kilotons, about the same size as the Hiroshima bomb. Savitsky orders it to be loaded into the tube. He screams, "We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all. We will not become the shame of the fleet."
He's preparing to nuke the U.S. aircraft carrier Randolph if he fires that torpedo.
The entire carrier group is destroyed. The U.S. responds with nuclear depth charges and airstrikes. The escalation ladder goes all the way to the top in a matter of minutes.
But he doesn't fire. Why not?
Soviet protocol. On this specific submarine, the launch required the unanimous agreement of 3 officers: the captain, the political officer, and the flotilla commander.
And the flotilla commander just happened to be on board B-59 for this trip.
Vasily Arkhipov.
The man who saved the world.
The captain said launch. The political officer said launch. Arkhipov said no.
Just imagine that scene. The captain is screaming. The hull is shaking. Men are literally passing out from the heat. And Arkhipov just stands there.
He kept his cool. He argued that the Americans were just signaling, not attacking. He said if they wanted to kill them, they would have been dead already. He insisted they surface and try to contact Moscow.
He had to physically block the captain.
The accounts vary, but it was a heated physical confrontation. But Arkhipov actually outranked the captain, and he eventually convinced Savitsky to surface.
It's just terrifyingly fragile. One man's intuition versus the end of civilization.
It really dismantles that idea of great man history. Sure, Kennedy and Khrushchev were important, but the fate of the entire species came down to a guy named Vasily in a sweaty submarine who just decided not to turn a key.
While all this is happening, the leaders in Washington and Moscow are realizing they're losing control. The machine is moving too fast.
Yes. Khrushchev realizes his commanders are shooting down planes without his permission. Kennedy realizes his military is about to mutiny if he doesn't act. They need a way out, fast. And this leads to the War of the Letters.
Khrushchev writes to Kennedy on October 26th.
And it's a fascinating letter. It's not written in diplomatic speak at all. It's emotional. It's rambling. He talks about the knot of war. He says, "Mr. President, let us not pull on the ends of the rope in which you have tied the knot of war, because the more the two of us pull, the tighter that knot will be tied."
He's begging for an off-ramp. He offers a deal. We take the missiles out of Cuba. You promise never to invade Cuba.
It was a good deal. Kennedy was ready to take it. But then, the next morning, on Black Saturday, a second letter arrives.
And this one is different.
Completely different tone. Stiff, formal, aggressive. It was likely written by the Politburo, forcing Khrushchev to toughen up his stance. It says, "We will remove the missiles from Cuba if you remove your Jupiter missiles from Turkey."
The price just went up. And the Turkey missiles were a real problem.
A massive problem. The U.S. actually wanted to remove the Jupiters. They were obsolete anyway, but they couldn't do it under a direct threat. If they publicly traded Turkey's security for America's security, NATO would collapse. The Allies would see the U.S. as a traitor.
So XCOM is stuck. They've got two different letters, one they can accept, one they can't.
They debate for hours. Then Llewellyn Thompson, a former ambassador to the Soviet Union, comes up with this brilliant psychological ploy.
The trolley tar strategy.
Exactly. Just pretend the second letter never arrived, ignore it completely, publicly answer the first letter.
Sorry, that second email must have gone to spam. I'm replying to the first one you sent.
Basically, Kennedy writes back accepting the terms of the first letter. You remove the missiles, we pledge not to invade.
Was that really enough? Because the Soviets, they really wanted those Turkey missiles gone.
It wasn't enough. Kennedy knew Khrushchev needed a win to sell to his own hardliners. So he sends his brother, Robert Kennedy, on a secret mission.
The meeting with Ambassador Dobrynin.
RFK meets Anatoly Dobrynin, the Soviet ambassador at the Justice Department. And the conversation is incredibly tense. RFK basically says, look, we have to have an answer by tomorrow or we invade.
But then he offers the sweetener.
He tells Dobrynin, look, we can't make a public deal about Turkey, but if you take the missiles out of Cuba, I can promise you the Jupiter missiles in Turkey will be gone within a few months. We will take them out voluntarily.
A quid pro quo, but a secret one.
A gentleman's agreement. And RFK added a threat. If you ever speak of this deal publicly, we will deny it and we will call you a liar.
This was the key. Khrushchev gets his security guarantee for Cuba, and he gets the direct threat on his border removed. He accepts.
On October 28th, Radio Moscow broadcasts Khrushchev's order to dismantle the weapon.
The ships turn around, the world exhales.
And the dismantling of the Jupiters was later given the code name Operation Pot Pie.
Operation Pot Pie?
Really?
Don't ask me. Military code names are a strange world, but the missiles were removed.
So let's look at the scoreboard in the aftermath, because the perception of what happened became the reality.
Kennedy came out looking like a genius, a master statesman. He stood tall, he didn't blink, and he got the missiles out. The public didn't know about the secret Turkey deal for years.
And Khrushchev, he looked weak. He looked like an adventurer who got called out and folded immediately. The hardliners in the Kremlin never forgave him for the humiliation. 2 years later, in 1964, he was ousted in a coup.
And what about Castro?
Oh, Castro was absolutely livid. You have to remember, he wasn't consulted on the withdrawal at all. He heard about it on the radio like everyone else.
That's incredibly humiliating.
He smashed a mirror in his office. He screamed about Soviet betrayal. He refused to let UN inspectors into Cuba to verify the missile removal. The U.S. actually had to fly planes alongside the Soviet ships as they left to count the missiles on the decks because Castro wouldn't let them check on the ground.
You realize Cuba was just a pawn in their game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Both superpowers treated Cuba as a game board. But there were some positive outcomes. The hotline.
Right, because relying on Western Union telegrams that took hours to decode during a nuclear crisis is
Insane.
The lag time was hours, so they installed the Moscow-Washington hotline. It wasn't actually a red phone. It was a teletype machine, text only, to avoid mistranslations or emotional shouting matches.
A direct link. Are you nuking us? YN.
Essentially. It forced the two powers to keep talking.
Before we wrap up, I just want to circle back to the what if. Because you mentioned the tactical nukes earlier. That information didn't come out until 1992.
That's right. At a conference in Havana, a Soviet general revealed to Robert McNamara, who was there, that the tactical nukes had been in place and ready to fire.
McNamara must have turned white as a sheet.
They said he nearly fell out of his chair. He realized in that moment that the advice he was getting from the Joint Chiefs to invade would have resulted in the total destruction of the U.S. invasion force and inevitably a full-scale nuclear war.
It changes the entire narrative. It wasn't a triumph of brilliant crisis management. It was luck.
Kennedy himself later said he thought the odds of war had been between 1 and 3 and even.
A coin flip for the survival of the species.
It tells you that crisis management is mostly a myth. Once the machinery of war starts moving, the alerts, the mobilization, the pre-delegated authority, it takes on a life of its own that no one can really control.
So what's the takeaway for us sitting here today?
I think it's about the danger of certainty. LeMay was certain the Soviets wouldn't shoot. The Soviet commanders were certain the Americans were about to invade. Everyone was certain, and they were all wrong.
And maybe the importance of keeping a human element in the loop.
Absolutely. We need systems that allow for an Arkabuff. If we automate everything with AI and hypersonic missiles, we remove the space for that one guy to say, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right.
That is a chilling thought. We are building systems that might be too fast for the next Arkabuff.
We might be.
Well, on that cheerful note,
Yeah.
thank you for taking us through the 13 days.
My pleasure.
And for you, the listener, here's a final thought to chew on. We build statues of generals and presidents. But maybe, somewhere in a quiet square, there should be a statue of a tired, sweating Russian naval officer who just decided to put the safety back on.
I'd visit that statue.
Stay curious, everyone. We'll see you in the next deep dive.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening a file that I think is going to make you look at every meeting you have ever sat in.
Oh, for sure.
And probably every meeting you will ever sit in completely differently.
It is a pervasive one. It's one of those topics that once you see the mechanics of it, you just can't unsee it.
Right.
It really changes the way you view human dynamics.
We are tackling a mystery that I think every single person listening has witnessed. Maybe you've even, participated in it.
Mm-hmm.
It is the mystery of how groups of undeniably smart, experienced, well-meaning people, people who are individually brilliant, the best and the brightest,
Right.
can get together in a room and make absolute catastrophic decisions.
Yep.
Decisions that, none of them would have ever made on their own.
It is the classic smart people, bad decisions paradox.
Exactly. And I feel like the immediate reaction when we see a corporate disaster or a government blunder or, heck, even a homeowners association meltdown is to say, oh, they were just sheep, or it was peer pressure, or they were stupid. But the stack of research we have today suggests it is something much more specific.
Much more structural.
Yes, and honestly, a lot more dangerous than just simple peer pressure.
Right. We are exploring the phenomenon of groupthink.
Yeah.
And you are right to distinguish it from peer pressure. Those are, they're cousins, but they aren't twins.
Okay.
Peer pressure is usually about compliance. You do it because you want to fit in, even if you know it's wrong. You feel that friction.
You know you're faking it.
Exactly. Groupthink is different. It is a psychological trap where the desire for harmony within the group actually sort of overrides your ability to see reality.
You don't just go along with it.
No. You rationalize it. You rationalize it until you believe it's the right thing to do.
That is the terrifying part. It's rationalized conformity. You aren't just faking it. You're hacking your own brain to agree.
That is the perfect phrase for it. Rationalized conformity.
So we have a massive stack today. We have history, we have psychology, and we have some truly tragic case studies from the Bay of Pigs to the Space Shuttle Challenger.
Heavy stuff.
We're going to look at the symptoms so we can spot them, look at the disasters to see the cost, and most importantly, we need to get to the cure.
Right.
But before we get to the cure, we have to understand the disease. Where does this term actually come from? Because groupthink, it sounds Orwellian.
That is no accident.
Yeah.
The term was actually coined back in 1952 by William H. White Jr. in Fortune magazine.
Fortune, so a business publication.
Yes, and he explicitly derived it from George Orwell's 1984, specifically the concept of doublethink.
So it was a purposeful nod to that kind of, dystopian mind control.
Very much so. You have to remember the context of 1952. I mean, this is the era of the organization man.
Right. The man in the gray flannel suit.
Exactly. Corporate culture in America was booming, and there was this big shift from the rugged individualist to the company man. White wasn't just talking about, instinctive conformity. He was criticizing what he saw as a rationalized conformity in the corporate world. He felt there was this articulate philosophy emerging that said, group values are inherently right and good.
So he was worried that people were just giving up their own judgment to the committee.
He was dismayed. He called it the tyranny of groups.
So originally it was a critique of 1950s corporate culture, a critique of the idea that the committee knows best.
Exactly. But the science, the rigorous psychological framework we use today, that really comes from Irving Janis.
Okay.
He's a research psychologist at Yale University. In 1972, he published the seminal book, Victims of Groupthink. And that book, it changed everything regarding how we understand decision-making.
And how did he define it? Because groupthink is a word that gets thrown around a lot in pop culture now.
It does.
People often just use it to mean people agreeing too much. But Janis had a really specific definition.
He did. Janis defined it as a mode of thinking that people engage in when concurrent seeking.
Concurrent seeking.
That desire to agree becomes so dominant in a cohesive in-group that it overrides any realistic appraisal of alternative courses of action.
That's the killer phrase. It's valuing the good vibes of the meeting over the actual outcome of the decision.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Janis wasn't looking at low-stakes decisions. He didn't care about a group deciding, where to go for lunch.
Right.
He studied major American foreign policy disasters, Pearl Harbor, the Bay of Pigs, the escalation in Vietnam. He found that in every case, it wasn't that the leaders were stupid. It wasn't that they lacked data.
It was the group dynamic.
It was that the group dynamic prevented contradictory views from being expressed.
So the mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We need to understand the symptoms so we can spot them. Essentially, how do we diagnose this infection in our own teams?
Right.
Then we need to look at those historical disasters to see the cost and then figure out how to stop it. Let's start with the diagnosis. What causes this? Because most of us think a tight-knit team is a good thing, right?
We do.
We want cohesiveness. HR spends millions of dollars on retreats to build cohesiveness.
And that is the great paradox of groupthink. Janis identified high group cohesiveness as the primary antecedent, the main trigger.
Wait, hold on. So liking your team is the problem? The fact that we get along is the danger zone?
It sounds counterintuitive, but yeah, it is the precondition for the problem.
How so?
Think about it. Groups that lack cohesiveness, where everyone hates each other or barely knows each other, they might make bad decisions because they are arguing or disjointed, but they don't experience groupthink.
Okay.
They don't have that pressure to conform. Groupthink happens when the members are so friendly, so tight-knit, that they avoid speaking out against decisions to maintain those friendly relationships.
I see. It's the fear of rocking the boat. If I don't know you, I don't mind contradicting you. But if we are, best friends and we have this great team spirit, I don't want to be the one to ruin the vibe.
You value the relationship more than the truth.
Right.
Correct. But, and this is a crucial nuance, cohesiveness alone isn't enough. You can have a cohesive team that makes great decisions.
Okay, so it's not always bad.
No. Janis noted it becomes dangerous when you combine that high cohesiveness with structural faults.
What kind of faults?
Things like the group being insulated from the outside world. If you only talk to each other, you create an echo chamber.
Makes sense.
Or a lack of impartial leadership. If the boss makes it clear what they want before the discussion even starts.
Oh, that's a big one.
Huge. Or a lack of norms requiring methodical procedures. If you don't have a checklist for how to disagree, you just won't do it.
And I imagine stress plays a role, too. I mean, most of these disasters happen during crises.
A huge role. Situational context matters. If there's a highly stressful external threat or recent failures that have lowered the group's self-esteem, they're more likely to huddle together.
For safety.
They seek consensus for comfort rather than debating the hard facts. It's emotional safety seeking.
Okay, so we have the recipe. We have a tight team, a stressful situation, maybe a leader who isn't impartial, and we are cut off from outside voices. How do we know if we've crossed the line from good team to groupthink? Giannis actually gave us a checklist, right?
He did. He devised 8 symptoms. And they are fascinating because they fall into 3 distinct categories.
Yeah.
If you are listening to this and thinking about your own workplace, this is where you really want to pay attention.
Let's break these down. Category 1 is overestimations of the group.
This is where the group starts to feel untouchable. The first symptom here is the illusion of invulnerability. It creates excessive optimism. The group starts to take extreme risks because they genuinely feel we are us, we are the best, we can't fail.
That feels like every startup right before they crash, or frankly, every empire right before it falls.
Often, yes, it's a blinding confidence.
Yeah.
The second symptom in this category is an unquestioned belief in the morality of the group.
Yep.
Members believe so strongly in the inherent rightness of their cause that they just ignore the ethical or moral consequences of their decisions.
So they assume we are good people, therefore our decisions must be good.
Exactly. It completely shuts down the ethical debate. You don't ask, is this right? Because you assume, since we are doing it, it must be right.
Which is a dangerous logical leap. Okay, category 2, closed-mindedness. This is about how the group deals with the outside world.
Right. This is the defense mechanism. First, you have rationalizing warnings. When red flags appear, and they always do, that challenge the group's assumptions.
You explain them away.
Yes. Instead of investigating them, the group collectively constructs a reason to explain them away.
Oh, that data point is an outlier, or that critic just doesn't get our vision, or that drop in sales is just because of the weather.
Exactly. You spend your mental energy explaining why the warning is wrong, rather than asking if it might be right.
And that leads to the next one.
It does. Stereotyping the outgroup. The group starts to view anyone who opposes them, competitors, critics, even other departments, as weak, evil, biased, stupid, or impotent.
That seems critical because if you think your enemy or the competition is stupid, you are going to underestimate them.
And you won't prepare for their reaction, it blinds you. If you think the competition is incompetent, you stop innovating.
Okay, category 3. This is the one that really hits home for me. Pressures toward uniformity. This is what happens inside the room.
This is the internal policing mechanism. First, you have self-censorship.
The silent killer.
It really is. This is when you have a doubt, you see a flaw, but you keep it to yourself. You avoid deviating from the consensus. You think, maybe I'm the only one who thinks this is a bad idea, so I'll just stay quiet.
I think everyone has felt that. You look around the table, everyone else is nodding, and you think, am I the crazy one?
And because everyone is self-censoring, you get the next symptom, the illusion of unanimity.
Right. Silence is viewed as agreement.
Everyone assumes everyone else agrees. So you look around the room, you see no objections, and you think, wow, everyone loves this idea. But in reality, half the room might be terrified, but they're all looking at each other's masks.
It's a hall of mirrors. But there's another specific term in this category that I love. Well, I don't love the behavior, but the name is so descriptive. Mind guards.
Ah, yes, mind guards. These are fascinating. These are self-appointed members who shield the group from dissenting information.
It sounds like a sci-fi villain, the Mind Guard.
It acts like one. It isn't usually a formal role on the org chart. It's someone who takes it upon themselves to say, hey, let's not bother the CEO with that negative report, or let's not bring up that legal risk right now. It'll just kill the momentum.
So they're protecting the group from bad news.
They protect the group from adverse facts that might break the shared complacency.
They think they are helping. They think they're protecting the leader or the team's focus.
Exactly. But they are actually cutting the team off from reality.
So let's recap the diagnosis. You have a group that feels invulnerable and morally superior. They rationalize away any warnings and think their enemies are stupid. And inside the group, everyone is self-censoring, assuming everyone else agrees, and there are specific people actively hiding bad news.
Yeah.
That sounds like a recipe for absolute disaster.
And history confirms it. It is a recipe for catastrophe.
Let's move to section 2 and talk about those expensive lessons. Because Giannis didn't just theorize this in a lab, he pulled it from the headlines. The grandfather of all groupthink case studies is the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961.
Right.
Set the scene for us. Why is this the perfect example?
This was the primary case study Giannis used to build his theory. You have to look at the personnel. You have the Kennedy administration. These were the best and the brightest, as David Halberstam called them.
Right.
Highly intellectual, experienced people, Harvard deans, corporate titans. And they inherited a plan from the Eisenhower administration to use Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro.
And on paper, to them, it just looked like a standard covert operation.
To them, perhaps. But the failure was that Kennedy's team just uncritically accepted the CIA's plan. They exhibited classic groupthink symptoms throughout the entire planning phase.
Give us the specifics. How did those symptoms we just talked about manifest in the White House Situation Room?
First, stereotyping. They had a total contempt for Castro. They assumed his Air Force was ineffective, his army was weak, and crucially, they assumed that the Cuban people would immediately rise up and join the invaders. They completely underestimated the outgroup.
So illusion of invulnerability. They thought, we're the United States, he is just a dictator in the Caribbean, he'll fold.
100%. But what about the internal dynamic? Surely someone in that room thought, this is a bad idea? The plan had huge holes.
Right. Did anyone speak up?
They did, initially. Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr., a famous historian and special assistant to Kennedy.
Oh, yeah, historian, right.
He had serious objections. So did Senator Fulbright. But the group dynamic just crushed it. The group ignored Fulbright. And Schlesinger, this is the tragic part, Schlesinger admitted later that he minimized his own doubts.
That's self-censorship.
Textbook.
But why would a man like Schlesinger silence himself?
He wrote about it later. He said he felt an enormous pressure not to be the nuisance. He didn't want to break the camaraderie of the new administration. They were the new guys in town. They were bonding. There were also line guards. Robert Kennedy, the president's brother and attorney general, actually took Schlesinger aside at a party.
At a party, not even in a formal meeting.
Nope, at a party. He pulled him aside and told him, you may be right or you may be wrong, but the president has made his mind up. Don't push it any further.
Wow. That is the definition of a mind guard. Shut up for the good of the team.
Exactly. He was shielding the leader from dissent. And because of that silence, the plan went forward with fatal flaws. The air support failed. The uprising never happened. The invaders were slaughtered or captured immediately.
A total fiasco. A humiliation on the global stage.
But here is the twist and the hope. Just 1 year later, 1962, the same administration faced the Cuban Missile Crisis, a much, much higher stakes situation.
Nuclear war was on the table.
Right.
Did they fall into the same trap? Did they groupthink their way into World War III?
No. And this is crucial. Kennedy learned. He realized the process had failed him at the Bay of Pigs. He realized that his presence and the group's niceness had blinded them.
So for the missile crisis, he changed the rules.
He completely changed the rules.
What did he do differently?
Well, for one, he invited outside experts to come in and challenge them. He encouraged members to discuss solutions with trusted people outside the inner circle to get fresh perspectives.
Breaking the insulation.
Yes. And famously, Kennedy deliberately absented himself from some of the meetings.
So he wouldn't be the leader anchoring the opinion.
Exactly. He knew that if he was in the room, people would try to please him or guess what he wanted. He wanted them to debate without that pressure. It was a vigilant appraisal, not a concurrent seeking session.
And it worked.
Most historians agree that this shift in process likely saved the world from nuclear war.
That is a powerful example of how process matters more than just IQ. You can have the smartest people in the world, but if the process is bad, you get the Bay of Pigs. If the process is good, you solve the missile crisis.
Precisely. Intelligence doesn't save you from groupthink. Process saves you.
Let's look at another military example, going back a bit further. Pearl Harbor, 1941. This seems harder to pin on groupthink because it was a surprise attack. How does groupthink fit here?
It fits into the lack of preparation. It explains why the surprise was so total. The U.S. Navy and Army officers in Hawaii weren't completely in the dark. Washington had set warnings that Japan was arming for an offensive somewhere in the Pacific. But the group in Hawaii, the admirals and generals, shared rationalizations to dismiss them.
What were they telling themselves?
Janus documents specific quotes that were circulating among the high command in Hawaii. They said things like, the Japanese would never dare attempt a full-scale surprise assault because it would mean all-out war, which the U.S. would surely win.
That's the illusion of invulnerability again. We are too big to be hit.
Exactly.
And I remember reading something about the torpedoes specifically.
Yes. This is a technical rationalization. They convinced themselves that no warships anchored in the shallow water of Pearl Harbor could ever be sunk by torpedo bombs.
They believed the water was physically too shallow for torpedoes to drop and arm themselves before hitting the bottom.
So they relied on that assumption rather than preparing for the possibility that the enemy had innovated.
Correct. And the Japanese had innovated. They developed wooden fins for their torpedoes, specifically for shallow water.
Wow.
The American commanders were closed-minded. They didn't ask, what if they figure it out? They just assumed they can't.
It's that refusal to rethink your assumptions. It's comforting to think the enemy can't touch you. It's scary to think they can. So the group chooses comfort.
Until the bombs start falling.
Let's jump forward to a more modern tragedy, and one that involves engineers and hard data. 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger.
This one is heartbreaking because we know exactly who the dissenters were and we know exactly how they were silenced.
It is heartbreaking, and it's a classic example of how stress and structure combine. The pressure here was intense.
Right.
NASA had a self-imposed schedule. They wanted to launch for the State of the Union address. They had the first civilian, Krista McAuliffe, a teacher, on board. The publicity stakes were huge. The group was under siege from the schedule.
And there was a technical problem, a very specific one.
The O-rings. These were rubber seals in the rocket boosters. Engineers from Morton Thiokol, the contractor who built the boosters, explicitly warned that the cold temperatures on launch day, it was freezing in Florida that morning, could cause the O-rings to become brittle and fail.
So they said delay. They recommended a delay. So the warning was there. It wasn't a surprise. The data was in the room.
It was in the room. There was a conference call. The engineers said, don't launch. But the NASA management team, caught in the illusion of invulnerability regarding the shuttle's safety record.
They had never lost a crew.
Right. And feeling the pressure of the schedule, they pushed back. And this is where the dynamic gets really dark.
Yes. A senior NASA manager famously said to the Thiokol team, "My God, Thiokol, when do you want me to launch?" "Next April." That is extreme pressure. But then they did something technically devastating.
What was that?
They shifted the burden of proof.
Explain that.
Usually in aerospace, you have to prove it is safe to fly. If there is doubt, you don't go.
Right. Safety first.
In this meeting, because of the groupthink pressure, they demanded the engineers prove it was unsafe.
That's a completely different standard. Prove to me 100% that it will blow up.
And the engineers couldn't prove it 100% because they didn't have data for those specific low temperatures. So the managers took the silence of the data as permission to launch.
And then you have the mind guard moment within Thiokol.
Yes. The Thiokol managers, feeling the pressure from their client NASA, went offline to talk. The general manager turned to his vice president of engineering who was holding out and said, he said, "Take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat."
Take off your engineering hat. That is chilling. Stop looking at the truth and start looking at the contract.
Exactly. He was asking him to conform to the group's need, not the machine's reality. They voted to launch. The warning was ignored to maintain the launch schedule harmony.
And 73 seconds later, the shuttle broke apart.
Yeah.
It's devastating. And it shows that groupthink isn't just about people being nice to each other. It's about how hierarchy and pressure can warp the way we look at facts. We've talked government and military, but this happens in business too. And sometimes it happens to companies that seem perfect. You have the story of Swissair.
Yes, the flying bank.
That sounds like a compliment.
It was. For decades, Swissair was considered the most financially stable, technically perfect airline in the world. They were the gold standard.
Which breeds the illusion of invulnerability.
Success is a dangerous teacher. It is. In the 1990s, they started making poor decisions. But what's interesting is the structure of their board.
Yeah.
They reduced the size of their board and eliminated a lot of industrial expertise.
So they got smaller and less knowledgeable.
And the board became very homogenous. Similar backgrounds, similar values, politically connected Swiss directors.
So they insulated themselves.
They insulated themselves and they lacked diversity of thought. This homogeneity is a key antecedent for groupthink. Because they all thought alike, they reinforced each other's bad ideas. They started believing in their own morality and invulnerability.
And what did they do?
They embarked on a disastrous expansion strategy called the Hunter strategy, buying up failing airlines, thinking they could fix them because, we are Swissair.
And they couldn't.
They couldn't. They burned through their cash reserves, and eventually the flying bank went bankrupt and was grounded. The group was so cohesive, so sure of its own excellence, that it flew right into the ground.
It's amazing how success can be the breeding ground for failure. If you think you can't fail, you stop checking if you're about to. One last example, which is a bit different. Sports. The 1999 Major League Umpires Association.
This is a great, rarely discussed case. It shows how even a union, a group fighting for its livelihood, can fall into this.
What happened?
The Umpires Association, led by Richie Phillips, wanted to gain leverage in negotiations with Major League Baseball. They came up with a radical strategy: a mass resignation.
Wow.
They would all resign effectively on the same day to force the MLB to the table.
That's a bold move. You can't play ball without us.
It was. But they fell into groupthink. First, they overestimated their power, the illusion of invulnerability. They truly thought the league would collapse without them.
Okay.
Second, they exhibited closed-mindedness by viewing the MLB not as a negotiating partner, but as an evil enemy that would definitely cave.
And what about the dissent? Surely some umpires were thinking, wait, what if they just accept my resignation and I lose my job?
Many were. But there was intense pressure toward uniformity. There was self-censorship. Many umpires didn't want to resign but went along with the group because they didn't want to be seen as scabs or traitors to the union.
And what happened?
The MLB called their bluff. They just accepted the resignations, they hired replacements, and promoted minor league umpires. The strategy failed completely because the union leadership had lost touch with the reality of their leverage.
They believed their own hype.
They bluffed, but they believed their own bluff, precisely. And dozens of umpires lost their careers because of it.
Okay, we've seen the wreckage, we've seen the burnt-out hulls of ships, shuttles, and careers. Let's pivot to Section 3. The cure. This is the most important part. How do we stop this? If I'm a leader or just a team member, what can I do?
Right.
Giannis didn't just diagnose the problem, he offered prescriptions, right?
He did. And they are very practical. They aren't vague things like be more open. They are structural changes. First and foremost, the critical evaluator.
What does that mean in practice?
Leaders must assign the role of critical evaluator to every member of the group.
Every member.
Every member. This is crucial. It's not just saying, feel free to speak up. It is explicitly telling the team, your job, the reason you are in this chair, is to poke holes in this plan. If you agree with me, you aren't doing your job.
That changes the incentive structure. It changes the norm from agreement is good to critical analysis is good.
Yes, it gives people permission to be the bad guy without feeling like a bad friend. Second, leader silence. As we saw with Kennedy in the missile crisis, leaders should not express their opinion when assigning a task.
This is so hard for leaders.
It's incredibly hard. Leaders usually get to be leaders because they have strong opinions. But if the boss walks in and says, okay, team, I think we should launch next week, but I want to hear your thoughts, the discussion is already over.
It's done.
Everyone anchors to next week. The leader must remain impartial initially. State the problem, not the solution.
State the problem, then shut up.
Basically. Third, outside experts. Invite people from outside the group into the meetings. But here is the key. You have to allow the group members to question them.
Oh, that's important.
It breaks the insulation. It forces the group to defend their ideas to a stranger.
And there's one role that everyone knows, but maybe doesn't use correctly, the devil's advocate.
Yes. Giannis suggested assigning a specific person to be the devil's advocate for each meeting. But there is a trick to it. You have to rotate that role.
Why rotate it? Why not just have Dave from accounting be the guy who always says no?
Because if it's always Dave's, everyone just tunes Dave out. Oh, there goes Dave's being negative again?
Right.
If you rotate it, it depersonalizes the conflict. Today it's my job to disagree, tomorrow it's yours. It legitimizes the act of challenging the consensus.
That makes sense. Now, there's a modern twist on the devil's advocate that comes from Cass Sunstein, the legal scholar. He suggests that a fake devil's advocate might not be enough.
Right. Sunstein argues that if everyone knows you're just playing a role, it's less effective. It becomes a bit of a game. Okay, you did your devil's advocate thing, now let's get back to agreeing.
So what's his solution?
He suggests a red team.
Like in military?
Yes. A red team is a group expected to pursue an alternative strategy for real. They aren't just pretending to disagree. Their goal is to defeat the primary plan. They try to break it.
So if blue team is planning the invasion, red team is playing the role of the enemy trying to stop it.
Exactly. It forces the main group to actually defend their ideas against a determined adversary, not just a polite skeptic. It simulates reality.
That sounds intense, but effective. And this brings us to the topic of diversity. We hear about diversity a lot in a social justice context, but in the context of groupthink, it's a mechanical safety valve.
It is empirically a shield. It's not just about fairness, it's about performance. There's a fascinating study by Hong and Page from 2004. They found that diverse teams of problem solvers can outperform teams of the best problem solvers.
Wait, explain that. A diverse team beats a team of the best.
Yes, because the best, let's say the top 10 IQs, usually went to the same schools, studied under the same professors, and think the same way.
They have the same blind spots.
Right. They start to think alike, groupthink. A diverse team, diverse in background, thought, gender, experience, brings unique perspectives. They have different heuristics or ways of solving problems.
So they naturally challenge assumptions because they don't share the same assumptions to begin with.
Exactly. They don't have to try to be devil's advocates. They just see the world differently. The friction they create is actually the value.
So homogeneity is the enemy of reality testing. If everyone looks the same and thinks the same, you are flying blind.
Absolutely.
I want to touch on some modern critiques before we wrap up. Is the theory of groupthink like settled science? Or is it getting updated?
Always getting updated. It's been 50 years since Janus. There is the ubiquity model by Robert Barron. He argues that Janus was a bit too focused on cohesiveness.
Okay.
Barron says you don't actually need a tight-knit friends group for groupthink to happen. He says it can happen just from social identification and low self-efficacy.
Meaning what?
Meaning, if I just identify as part of a group, say I'm a Republican or I'm a Google employee, and I feel a bit insecure or unsure of myself, I will conform to what I think the group believes, even if I don't know the people in the room.
So even a group of strangers could fall into it if they are insecure?
Potentially. If they are looking for cues on how to behave.
Yeah.
And then there's the concept of collective illusions by Todd Rose. This is fascinating.
What's that?
It's when people go along with what they think the group wants, even if nobody in the group actually wants it.
A phantom consensus.
Exactly. Imagine a meeting where everyone votes for a plan. Afterward, you interview them privately. Person A says, I hated it, but I voted yes because B and C seemed to like it. Person B says, I hated it, but A and C seemed to like it.
No.
Everyone is privately thinking, I hate this, but publicly acting like they love it because they are misreading the room.
That's tragic. You get a result that literally 0% of the people wanted.
It happens more than you think.
And finally, is there a bright side? Can group identity ever help?
Interestingly, yes. Choi and Kim, back in '99, found that group identity can lead to better performance if the group norm is critical thinking.
Ah. So if the identity of the group is we are the people who argue and find the truth, then cohesiveness makes you better at that.
Exactly. It depends on what you are cohesive around. Are you cohesive around being nice, or are you cohesive around getting it right? If your team prides itself on being brutally honest, then groupthink actually reinforces honesty.
That is a crucial distinction. It's about the culture you build.
It changes everything.
So let's bring this deep dive to a close. We've unpacked a lot.
We have.
The danger is clear. It's not just being a sheep. It's rationalized conformity. It's the illusion of invulnerability. It's mind guards blocking the truth.
It's smart people convincing themselves that the torpedoes won't work or the O-rings won't fail.
And the cure is structured conflict. You cannot rely on people just being brave. You have to build bravery into the process.
Critical evaluators, leader silence, red teams, and real diversity.
There's a pop culture reference that always comes to mind for me with this. Monty Python's Life of Brian.
A classic.
Brian is addressing the crowd of followers who are treating him like a messiah, and he yells, "You don't need to follow me. You've got to think for yourselves. You're all individuals."
And what do they say?
And the crowd chants back in perfect unison.
We're all different.
And then one lone voice from the back pipes up.
I'm not.
It's the perfect satire of the irony of mass conformity. We all think we're independent thinkers until we get in that room.
It really is.
I want to leave the listener with one final provocative thought. We mentioned the Abilene paradox briefly earlier, the idea of the phantom consensus.
Right.
The name comes from a story by Jerry Harvey. A family in Texas is sitting on a porch on a hot afternoon. The father suggests driving to Abilene for dinner. It's a long, hot, dusty drive in a car with no AC. The mother says, "Sure, sounds good." The daughter says, "I'll go if you guys want to." The husband says, "I'm game."
They all go.
Yeah.
The terrible trip.
They drive hours, have a terrible meal, drive back in the heat, exhausted and miserable. And when they get home, someone admits, "I didn't actually want to go. I just went because I thought you wanted to."
And it turns out, no one wanted to go.
Not a single person. They took a trip to hell that not a single person desired because they failed to speak up.
It's the tragedy of unvoiced objection.
So here is the question for you, the listener. Where in your life are you currently on the road to Abilene? Where are you acting as a mind guard? Where are you keeping quiet because you assume everyone else agrees? Because the odds are, if you have a doubt, someone else does too. You might be the only thing standing between your team and an iceberg.
That's the takeaway. True loyalty to a group isn't agreement. It's the willingness to speak the uncomfortable truth.
Well said. Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you on the next one.
Stay critical.